Hey guys, it's QuickyBaby and welcome back to World of Tanks, and today I've got a full preview for you of an upcoming Tier 8 Premium Light Tank. It's the T92. Now this one kind of just snuck up on me. I had no idea about this vehicle, but I've had the pleasure of trying it out over the last few days, and I had to keep my big mouth shut, as lots of you might have seen it in my garage during one of my live streams. But now the NDA is finally lifted and I can share everything there is to know about this vehicle. And one thing that I really like about this tank is that it's not just another Tier 8 premium tank. For example, how many Soviet mediums do we have in the game? How many Soviet heavies do we have in the game? At least it's not another one of those. And this really fills the niche. It's the first high-tier premium American light tank. It has great camo. It's got a gun that you will be familiar with on the T71 and what used to be on the M41 Walker Bulldog. And I tell you what, it's suddenly got a look to it. Maybe this is kind of like Marmite. You're either going to love it or you're going to hate it. Stick around after I run down the statistics of this vehicle and let you know how it sticks up to some of its competition. I'll be featuring a double helping of Ace Tanker gameplay and then give you my conclusion about whether this vehicle is going to be the new best thing. And if you have no interest in picking up the T92 yourself, I'll let you know the vehicle's strengths and weaknesses so you can take them out effectively on the battlefield. So without further ado, let's get started. So as this is a new vehicle, the crew loadout might be important to all of you out there, and you'll be happy to know if you're a Sheridan driver that it's identical. You've got a commander, a gunner, a driver, and a loader, and the radio operator is the commander, so that's where you want to have situational awareness to boost up that view range of your light tanks. So now let's compare the T92 to some of its Tier 8 competition. Firstly, the M41 Walker Bulldog, that Tier 8 standard American light tank, the T71 CMCD, which is the non-autoloading version of the T71 at Tier 7, and also the only other Tier 8 light tank in the game, it's the M4190, aka the Black Dog. So immediately we notice that the damage per minute on the T92 is identical to the Tier 7 T71. It's slightly less than the M41 Walker Bulldog, but significantly less than the M4190. Now the T92 has a 76mm main armament that fires APCR as standard and heat as its premium rounds, and one thing that's great about the standard APCR rounds is you've got a fairly decent shell velocity of 1219, which makes engaging those long-range targets very nice indeed. And it is way better than the M4190's abysmal 830 meters a second shell velocity on its armor-piercing rounds. But one thing you must take into account with the Black Dog is that it has 250mm of heat penetration and higher alpha damage to boot, so you don't have to fire many premium rounds. Whereas the heat rounds on the T92, 210mm of penetration on a Tier 8 premium, that's really not going to deal very well with Tier 10 tanks, let alone the fronts of some Tier 8 tanks. And as soon as you start spamming these 210mm heat penetration shells, well, they cost 5,600 credits. You are going to lose credits very quickly indeed, significantly faster than in the Black Dog, for example, which has got more alpha, and also its premium shells are cheaper. And let's not forget that the Black Dog also has those fantastic HEP shells with 102mm of penetration. That's double what it really should be, and 320 alpha damage on those high explosive shells, where if you choose to fire HE with the T92, well, it's kind of pointless, with 38mm of penetration and 185 damage. One important thing to note as well is the T92 has 150 alpha damage, a lot like on the T71, whereas the Bulldog with the same caliber of gun has 170 alpha damage, which undoubtedly gives the Bulldog just the edge when it comes to firepower, because you won't have to fire so often. But now moving on to gun handling, this is really where the T92 shines. 1.8 seconds aim time just pips the Bulldog and the T71, and it equals the Black Dog. All of these tanks have got the same accuracy of 0.38, which is neither good nor terrible. But just check out these dispersion values when you're moving. 0.08. That's 33% better than the Bulldog and massively better than the T71 and the Black Dog. And check out the turret traverse dispersion. 0.05. Massively better than the Bulldog, half of the T71, and significantly better than the Black Dog. And so this means that the T92 barely has to aim and is also very efficient at shooting on the move. In fact, this number is so low that I actually forfeited using vertical stabilizers on this tank to be able to equip both vents and also coated optics. But if you were so inclined, you could sacrifice the coated optics or arguably the vents on this tank to be able to put on vertical stabilizers, and you'd pretty much not ever have to stop moving while continuously putting pretty darn accurate rounds downrange at your opponents. And it could be one of the best things about this vehicle for those of you who really cannot stop moving. And when you think about it, that's a pretty good attribute to have in your light tanks. So now on to mobility, probably one of the most important aspects to any light vehicle. And this is where it's a little bit disappointing for the T92. It's limited to 60 kilometers an hour forwards, worse than all of the other vehicles in this comparison. And this tank truly does feel like a bit of a slow light tank. And when you think that there are tier 9 mediums that are bombing it around at 65 kilometers an hour, it certainly feels like a letdown in the vehicle. Furthermore, the vehicle has a rather weak engine power, which gives it a power to weight ratio just over 20. But then again, 21.28 doesn't really slow the Black Dog down all that much. But just check out these ground resistances: 0.3 on hard, 0.4 on medium, and 1.1 on soft. On hard and medium, that's pretty much half of the Black Dog's ground resistances, which really allows the vehicle to accelerate in a straight line very well, especially upslope. But when it comes to the turning on this vehicle, its tank traverses a rather low 0.55, or shall I say 55 degrees a second, sorry, not 0.55. I'm obviously thinking too much about accuracies. And so that means that the Bulldog and the CMCD just trumps this vehicle when it comes to track traverse, and this kind of handles a bit more like a Black Dog. Next up, let's check out the durability of the T92, and yeah, it just pretty much doesn't have any armor, guys. This is going to get overmatched all the bleeding time, and it's only really low caliber guns that aren't going to overmatch the side of this vehicle. And so do everything that you can to avoid getting shot, but just take a look at the low profile of this tank. It's almost like a pancake, but it's quite a wide pancake. And I can imagine this would be really useful when you want to try and use a low-lying ridgeline or a building to be able to hide behind, maybe when you're trying to make a flanking maneuver and you want to remain undetected. And there's one thing I forgot to actually look at in the comparison, and that is that the vehicle has 20 degrees of elevation, 10 degrees of depression, and a fully traversable turret. And as we can see here, there's only one tiny little area to the left of the tank where there's this kind of viewports coming out here that actually prevents you from getting 10 degrees of depression. And it kind of doesn't look like a pancake tank like this should be able to get 10 degrees of depression, but you see what happens at the top of the vehicle? This is actually a pretty cool feature of the vehicle, is that when you depress the gun, the turret actually comes through the top of the tank, or shall I say, the gun comes through the top of the turret, which certainly makes this one of the cooler looking premium tanks that I feel that Wargaming have ever added into the game. So next up, hit points. Well, you know, hardly any tier 8 light tanks, or shall I say no tier 8 light tanks, have very good hit points, 1,000 to be exact. That means you're going to get one shot by quite a few vehicles at tier 10, and even things like an ISU 152, they're going to be removing 75% of your hit points with a single shot. Whereas if you had elected to purchase a tier 8 premium medium tank or a heavy tank, they'd only probably be removing half of your hit points. Thankfully, however, the view range on this vehicle is an awesome 400 meters, and also, remember this low profile. That means that the camera rating on this tank is excellent, ladies and gentlemen. Look at that. I think I've got this vehicle pretty much fully tricked out, apart from using, you know, the improved vents and using a directive, and I've got 39% camera rating when I'm moving, and a fantastic 9% camera rating when I'm shooting. Now let's take a look to see how my crew in the Black Dog do, and yeah, it looks like I've got concealment on all of my crew members, 30 and 7%. And so that definitely gives the T92 an edge. We've got just over 8% more camouflage than I do on the Black Dog. And you know, at 400 meters, 8% is going to make a big difference. That's 32 meters less view range that your opponents will require to spot you in the Black Dog compared to the T92. And even when we compare this to some of the tier 10 light tanks, for example, the Sheridan is packing 31.57. Yeah, my AMX 13105, well, that's better, 37.5. And it's only really the T100 LT that trumps this vehicle when it comes to camera rating on a high tier light. And so that could make this thing a very efficient scout indeed. And furthermore, if you drop vertical stabilizers because the gun dispersion values on this tank are so good, then the vents are going to be able to make just everything about your vehicle a little bit better. But you know what? I think that's quite enough theory crafting. Let's see how it performs in some gameplay. So first up, I'm playing on Muravanka in the worst possible matchmaking for this vehicle. But you know what? That's one of my favorite things about tier 8 premium light tanks, or shall I say, there's only one in the game at the moment, right? The Black Dog, and that's why it's so fresh to have another tier 8 light tank to play, is that even if you get into your worst possible matchmaking, it kind of doesn't really matter anyway. When you have no armor and everything's going to be overmatching you, who cares what gun is going to be hitting you? All that matters is whether they've got a high caliber gun with high alpha damage or if they've got an autoloader, a lot like that Bat Chatillon 25T. And just take a look at the aim time on this vehicle. You can just snap shots in. I'm not even using vertical stabilizers. And it looks like we found a Bat Chatillon a lot like me that decides that they want to use food instead of a fire extinguisher. And so that means that we have just picked apart a tier 10 medium tank at the start of this game, although I will admit that that fire was fairly fortunate. If I hadn't got that fire, for example, maybe he would have just driven over the ridgeline when he finished reloading and then come and killed me in 3 shots. He would have killed me in 5.5 seconds. But you know what? I like that spot at the beginning of the game. I would have run away if I hadn't got lucky against him, arguably, and I really wanted to just test this tank to the limits. So a couple of things I'd like to highlight here. Firstly, gun elevation, a little limited as we were coming down the slope there. Secondly, whenever I stop in this tank, it seems to lurch forwards. And so do you see that? Do you see how the tank tilts backwards and forwards? And that can actually rock the gun, and that can prevent you from being able to depress the gun. Or arguably, I guess, maybe if you were to rock the tank and then stop, you might be able to get a little bit of extra gun depression to be able to shoot your opponents. Do you need more gun depression than 10? Well, that's hard to say. But I'm sure that when I have more time with this vehicle and I play it a little bit more, I think there are probably some funky things that you're going to be able to do with it, because it's just got such good ground resistances, it's got such good acceleration, and it seems to be able to brake hard as well. And I'm sure there's some funky things that you could do with this vehicle. So we actually spotted out the entirety of that IS-3 there. He got 3 shot. Great result for me. I'm very happy to pick up that 1,500 spotting damage. And unfortunately, the artillery does manage to get a good round into us. But as you can see, I'm making a beeline straight towards him because, of course, even if artillery splashes you and doesn't even hit your tank directly, you can find out exactly where they are. So I'm not going to fire at the Borsig until I get behind a bush here. Don't know where that one went. That was a bit weird, wasn't it? Maybe that one went into the ridge. There we go. And oh, we hear the ding. There's the artillery. Let's see if we can get our revenge on that filthy tier 10 German piggy. Come on. Well, we actually have to shoot him a hell of a lot. And when you've only got 2,000 DPM, it does take you quite a while to be able to shut down those artillery. And that's something that I definitely want to highlight as you're watching the gameplay on this tank. Sure, when you manage to set a Bat Chat on fire, it might push your damage total quite high. But in the first 3 minutes of this game, we've still pulled off 1,500 damage. And you just have the mobility, and you're sneaky enough, and your view range is excellent at 400 meters for a tier 8 light tank. That is excellent view range. And even some of your tier 10 light tanks, like the T100 LT and also the AMX 13105, can't quite get to that level of view range. They've only got 390 meters. So I found this thing is a very impressive scout. Just look how decent the ground resistances are on this vehicle. Even though its power to weight ratio is only 20, it just seems to accelerate like an absolute drag racer car, you know? But also note that whenever I try to turn the tank, I can't quite use that great acceleration. And also when we manage to get up to our top speed limit, the 60 does feel fairly limiting for a light tank, unlike you would get on a higher tier vehicle or even some of its competition, for example in the form of the Black Dog. So now we spot the Borsig over the ridgeline and 10 degrees of gun depression. You see, you might notice that I'm quite confused when I was playing this game because my gun depression was bucking up there, and I didn't realize it's because of this area on the tank. And so now that I've got that in my mind and I've seen in the model why that is happening, I'll make sure that I don't let that happen in the future. And it's far better to aim over this side of the tank than it is to try and aim over that corner. And I'm sure that'll be a little bit frustrating for a few of you, but I think when you get used to it, you could probably mitigate the annoyance. Next up, I'm defending against an assault on San River, and again, not the best possible matchmaking, but it doesn't really matter for your lights. And actually, this is quite a nice game because I've got 3 artillery to spot for, so hopefully spotting is actually going to mean something in this kind of game. Not sure about all of you, but it doesn't feel so fun playing light tanks these days now that all of the artillery damage has been nerfed. And oh god, I was having a look at the tank. This is one of the first games I played in the vehicle, and I was just checking how beautiful the freaky mini turrets are and how the gun goes through the top. But here is actually just my bad driving. I haven't quite got used to the track traverse. It's not as good as I thought there, and so I actually missed the corner. But yeah, what do you guys think about the look of this vehicle? I think it's pretty darn cool looking. I should probably try and find out if this was actually a real tank or the history about it. You know, it's a bit sad in that back in the day I would always try and look about, the history of this vehicle. I kind of just take it for granted that none of these tanks exist these days. But oh well, we've managed to reach, in my opinion, the most important location on this map for a medium tank or a light tank or even heavy tanks with good gun depression, and that is in the center. From here I can extend my view range, and if I extend my view range then I might get my artillery firing. And indeed they are firing. It looks like they just hit the T28 prototype, but only for 209. I wanted a little bit more than that. We spot the T25 pilot out in the open. Will my artillery be able to hit him? Well, we'll just have to find out. Now, this tank goes backwards at 25 kilometers an hour, which is very nice indeed. And again, because of that, great ground resistances. It doesn't really matter that I'm on sandy terrain here. We're still going to be able to plow through it. And look at this, we're just spotting out a whole platoon of IS/IS-2s on that flank, and I'm so cheeky that I'm going to be shooting at them. And this is really where that, I think it was, what, 10% camo rating or just under when I'm firing comes in handy, because I know that these tanks have probably got at most about 400. If they've got really good camo rating, 450. I'll just quickly, while I talk here. Do you see how I managed to get behind the bush there to shoot at that VK so I don't even get spotted? And you'll also notice that I stopped to reload a premium round because I didn't think that the 175mm of penetration, especially with the drop-off over long range, was going to be able to engage him. I waste a heat round there. Well, actually, it's not. I guess it's not wasted because we picked up a kill for it. But we used that bush to be able to evade the line of sight of the VK, and it doesn't look like he wants to play this game anymore as he falls back. Now I'm going to load standard rounds again because I don't want to waste 5,600 credits or whatever it was per shot on this tank. That's absolutely horrendous. But I also want to show that as long as you don't try to take this tank against the heavy vehicles on the enemy team, or shall I say the very well armored heavy vehicles, then you're not going to be too bad. So I get slapped by a T28 prototype. Looks like he's undergunned there, or he had a significant low roll. And I'm thinking, I don't really want to go down this edge, but then I get hit by artillery and I lose my gun. And look at this. Oh, God. I just collided for 304 damage and I killed my driver, ladies and gentlemen. Because this tank is so low profile and because it's got a wedge at the front of the vehicle, going down a slope forwards in this tank is definitely not recommended. The whole of the front of this tank sticks out, so if you want to slip down a slope quickly, I almost recommend doing it backwards. Maybe you could do some kind of a handbrake turn and go backwards down the slope. I think you're going to have more chance of not damaging your vehicle if you do that. But again, we're learning things about this tank that will be annoying and learning things about this tank that are also really great. So far, the enemy team just seem to be wilting away. My team have made a gigantic formation that they will be pushing out from the 7 and the 8 line. But of course, I'm thinking about going and getting some action on this Patton instead. We hit his turret recently. The Patton, of course, had that turret armor buff. And again, we hit his turret. I'm not too interested in firing more heat rounds at him. So instead, I'm going to see if I can go get some damage on the pilot. Or alternatively, maybe I can flank around to get the T-34-100. But then it dawns on me. Bish, bash, bosh. Hopefully we can get all of those self-propelled guns. And I get lit up. But there they are. We found a whole pig pen on the enemy team. We miss the first shell on the move there. Unfortunate. Well, we hit it, but we just failed to penetrate. One into the back of the tank. And look at the dispersion values on this vehicle. Even though we go forwards and backwards, we can just snap those shots in accurately. But of course, the penetration, the alpha damage let this tank down a little bit. So we spot the artillery, 229 damage splash on him there. The T28 takes a look at us. He's probably going to be more fussed about shooting the heavies, I think, that are about to crest the corner. There we go. The GW Panther actually gets spotted by the IS. He's trying to come over towards me to shotgun me, but I'm not there any longer, buddy. And in fact, now the T28 prototype will clearly be aiming at the IS. I get to come around the corner, shoot the GW Tiger P. And this is just where this tank is absolutely lovely. Look at this dispersion on the move. Do you see how the reticle barely gets big? So I'm keeping my eye on the T28 prototype. I don't want him to turn around. He doesn't have a fully traversable turret. I can finish off the GW Tiger Pig. And there we go. Now we can hopefully go and track this guy to get some extra damage onto him. Well, at least assistance. Then we angle our tank a little bit more to be able to also penetrate his vehicle. And then considering I don't have a clean shot into his tracks and his hull, we put a round into the back of his tank. And from here on, that Patton just gets killed by the Tiger P. So now on to the results in our first round on Muravanka. Well, we didn't get any hero medals, but we do pick up an ace tanker for 1,256 base experience points. I guess that's what happens if you do take out pretty much the entirety of a tier 10 medium tank, albeit with a lucky fire. And one thing that is really cool about this vehicle is, of course, it makes good credits as it is a tier 8 premium tank, a lot like the Black Dog. 117,000 base credits with a premium account, and I was running a personal reserves bonus while I played this game, and so 166,000 credits profit. But if we take off the 58, that's still 108,000 credits profit without the reserve. So next up on Sand River, another ace tanker, but not quite as good this time. 1,217. I guess that's because I wasn't shooting quite so high tier vehicles. This time we get a Pascucci's medal for vanquishing 2 of the enemy artillery and a scout medal. How many tanks do we spot? Wow, we just squeaked it. 9, the minimum amount that you need to be able to get that. And this time we make 97,000 credits profit. We resupply the ammunition in this vehicle, which was 17,000 credits this time, I guess, because we fired a couple of heat rounds there. And we also resupply our cola consumable at 10,000 credits, giving us still a profit of 63,000. Not too bad for a 5-minute game. Now, of course, it almost goes without saying that these were good scenarios for the T92, and I played a lot of games where this tank was incredibly frustrating with the low amount of penetration that it had, its low durability, its low hit points. But then again, that's light tanks in a nutshell, right? And so do I think the T92 is now the best tier 8 premium tank in the game? Well, no, not at all. Unless you're an excellent player or you just really love your light tanks, I think a lot of people will struggle in this vehicle. It's a specialist tank. And how do I feel it stacks up compared to the Black Dog? Well, I feel that it provides it with some competition. Undoubtedly, it has way better gun handling. Its acceleration is better, but its top speed limit is less. It's got better camo, but the Black Dog has the better gun, undoubtedly. And when we take out the other two tanks in the comparison and we see how it stacks up to the tier 7 American light tank, well, all it has is a penetration advantage, a little bit of gun handling. It's actually kind of a little bit slower, and it's got a tiny little bit extra view range. And of course, some extra hit points, 160. That's not even that big for a whole tier up. And so if you want to play a tank that is kind of overpowered tier for tier, then you want to get into the T71. However, if you want to crew train your American light tanks and also make some credits at the same time, then I don't think you can go that wrong with the T92. In fact, there is no competition. And so that's something I'd like to stress here. And you know what? I'd give props to Wargaming for this. Finally, they have given us a tier 8 premium tank that isn't just another Soviet medium. It's not just another Soviet heavy. We don't have any high tier American light tanks, and it's fantastic that we finally have one. And it's also great that this vehicle clearly isn't overpowered, yet it looks pretty darn cool. In my opinion, all of these attributes mean that this is a premium tank that is done right. Wargaming, please fill the niches. We don't have a British heavy. We don't have a tier 8 British tank destroyer. We don't have a Japanese premium heavy. Oh, well, maybe we don't want one. And personally, for me at least, as long as they're balanced, a lot like this tank, then I don't think that people can have that much of a problem with Wargaming releasing premium tanks. And so your final question might be, when is this tank going to be released? And the answer is that I don't know yet. Wargaming wouldn't tell me. But considering what time of year it is, I don't think you have to be a rocket scientist to figure that we might be seeing this tank very soon. And so that about covers it for the T92, ladies and gentlemen. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, give it a thumbs up. If you absolutely hated it, give it a thumbs down and let me know why in the comments. And as always, thank you so much for watching. You've been epic, and hopefully I'll see you soon.